Rosa Martinez had worked the night shift at Sunset Manor for 8 years, but she had never seen anything like what happened on the 4th floor that October evening. The elevator doors opened with their familiar ding, and she stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, her soft-soled shoes silent against the polished linoleum. Room 207 sat at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar, casting a thin rectangle of yellow light across the floor. She had been assigned to Harold Whitman 3 months ago when his previous caregiver quit without notice. The woman had left a brief note saying only that she couldn't handle the situation anymore. Rosa remembered thinking it was odd. Harold was 91 years old, mostly bedridden, and according to his medical chart, suffered from advanced dementia. He rarely spoke and needed assistance with everything from eating to turning in bed. What could be so difficult about caring for a man who seemed lost in his own fading memories? Rosa pushed the door open and stepped inside. Harold lay in his hospital bed, his white hair thin and wispy against the pillow. His eyes were closed, and his breathing came in shallow, measured breaths. The room smelled of antiseptic and the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener she had placed on his nightstand weeks ago. She had always believed that even patients with dementia deserved small comforts. "Good evening, Mr. Whitman," she said softly, setting down her medical bag on the chair beside his bed. "How are we feeling tonight?" Harold's eyes opened slowly. They were pale blue, almost gray, and for a moment they seemed to focus on her face with startling clarity. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Rosa had grown accustomed to this. Sometimes patients tried to speak, but couldn't form the words. She reached for his wrist to check his pulse. That's when she noticed the notebook. It sat on his nightstand, partially hidden beneath a box of tissues. The cover was worn brown leather, and several pages were marked with small strips of paper. Rosa had been in this room dozens of times over the past 3 months, and she had never seen this notebook before. She glanced at Harold, whose eyes had closed again, then carefully lifted the tissue box. The notebook fell open to a page covered in shaky handwriting. The ink was blue, and the letters were uneven, as if written by someone with trembling hands. Rosa squinted in the lamplight and began to read. Day 1237. She doesn't know I can still think. They all believe I'm gone, lost in the fog. But I'm here, trapped inside this failing body, watching them talk about me like I'm already dead. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Harold, whose chest rose and fell in the same steady rhythm. His face showed no expression, no sign of awareness. She turned the page. The new caregiver seems kind. She talks to me like I'm still human. The others just move my body around like furniture. Yesterday, the doctor told my daughter I probably don't understand anything anymore. If only they knew I hear every word. The handwriting was definitely Harold's. Rosa had seen his signature on admission forms. But according to everyone at the facility, Harold Whitman hadn't spoken a coherent sentence or shown signs of awareness in over 2 years. His daughter visited once a month and spent most of the time talking to the staff about his condition, rarely addressing Harold directly. Rosa flipped through more pages, entry after entry, dated and detailed. Harold wrote about the nurses who were rough with him during bed changes. He wrote about missing his late wife, Margaret, and wishing he could tell his daughter that he understood why she found it hard to visit. He wrote about the loneliness of being conscious but unable to communicate, of watching the world continue around him while everyone believed he was no longer part of it. Day 1244. The night nurse with the gentle hands was here again. Rosa, I heard someone call her. She adjusted my pillow without being asked and made sure the blanket covered my feet. Small kindnesses matter more when you can't ask for them. Rosa felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had done those things, but she never imagined Harold was aware of them. She thought of all the times she had chatted to him about her day, assuming he couldn't hear or understand. She had told him about her daughter's graduation, about her husband's new job, about the garden she was planning for spring. She kept reading. Harold wrote about the physical therapy sessions where therapists moved his limbs while discussing their weekend plans. He wrote about lying awake at night, unable to turn over, listening to the sounds of the facility around him. He wrote about the fear that he would die without ever being able to tell someone that he was still there, still thinking, still feeling. Day 1251. I've been practicing. Late at night, when no one is watching, I try to move my fingers. Just a little. It's exhausting, and most of the time nothing happens. But yesterday, I managed to twitch my pinky. Progress. Rosa set the notebook down with trembling hands. She looked at Harold's face, searching for any sign of consciousness. His eyes remained closed, his expression blank. But now she wondered what was happening behind those closed lids. She reached for his hand and held it gently. "Mr. Whitman," she whispered. "Harold, if you can hear me, if you're really in there, try to squeeze my hand." Nothing happened. Rosa waited, counting her own heartbeats. Just as she was about to let go, she felt it. The faintest pressure against her palm. So slight she might have imagined it. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You are in there." Harold's eyes opened. This time, Rosa was certain she saw recognition in them. His mouth moved, and she leaned closer. "Help," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Please." Rosa's mind raced. She thought about Harold's medical file, about the doctors who had declared him unresponsive, about the family who had accepted that he was essentially gone. She thought about the implications of what she had discovered. Harold wasn't just aware. He was fully conscious, trapped in a body that wouldn't obey his mind. She picked up the notebook again and flipped to the most recent entry, dated just 3 days ago. Day 1268. I've been thinking about what I want to say if I ever get the chance. First, I want to tell Rosa that she saved my sanity. When everyone else treats you like an empty shell, having someone speak to you like a person makes all the difference. Second, I want to see my daughter one more time and tell her I love her. Third, I want to explain to the doctors that their tests are wrong. I'm not gone. I'm just hidden. Rosa sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had discovered. She thought about Harold's previous caregivers, the ones who had quit without explanation. Had they found the notebook too? Had they realized what it meant and been unable to cope with the responsibility? She looked at Harold again. His eyes were open now, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. How many patients were like him? How many people had been written off as unresponsive when they were actually aware but unable to communicate? "Harold," she said softly, "I need to tell the doctors. I need to tell your daughter. This changes everything." Harold's eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Rosa interpreted it as a nod. She spent the rest of her shift reading through the notebook. Harold had documented everything with remarkable detail and clarity. He wrote about the progression of his condition, about the moments when his body failed him, about the gradual realization that no one knew he was still conscious. He wrote about the other patients on the floor, speculating about which ones might also be aware but unable to communicate. Most heartbreakingly, he wrote about his dreams of recovery, of somehow finding a way to break through the prison of his own body. He had researched locked-in syndrome in his mind, remembering articles he had read years ago about patients who appeared vegetative but retained consciousness. He wondered if that's what had happened to him, if the dementia diagnosis was wrong or incomplete. As dawn approached, Rosa made a decision. She couldn't keep this secret. Harold deserved to be heard, to be treated as the conscious, thinking person he was. But she also knew that revealing his condition would change everything for him and his family. She sat beside his bed as the morning light filtered through the windows. "Harold, I'm going to call Dr. Peterson. I'm going to show him your notebook. Are you ready for that?" Harold's hand moved slightly against the bedsheet. Rosa took it as confirmation. Dr. Peterson arrived within an hour, skeptical but intrigued by Rosa's phone call. She had told him only that there had been developments with Harold Whitman that required immediate attention. When she showed him the notebook, his expression shifted from doubt to amazement to concern. "This is extraordinary," he said, flipping through the pages. "If this is genuine, if Mr. Whitman is truly conscious and aware, we need to completely re-evaluate his care plan." They conducted a series of simple tests. Harold was able to respond to basic questions with eye movements and slight hand gestures. It was exhausting for him. Rosa could see the effort it took, but the responses were consistent and purposeful. Dr. Peterson shook his head in wonder. "This is a form of locked-in syndrome, but with some retained motor function. It's incredibly rare, especially in conjunction with his other medical conditions. We need to bring in specialists, run new tests, explore communication devices." Harold's daughter, Patricia, arrived that afternoon. Rosa had called her, explaining only that there had been important developments. Patricia was a woman in her 60s with Harold's same pale blue eyes. She had been preparing herself for her father's death for months, resigned to the belief that the man who had raised her was already gone. Rosa showed her the notebook. Patricia read silently, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked at her father with new eyes. "Dad," she whispered, "are you really in there?" Harold's eyes opened, and this time there was no mistaking the love and recognition in them. Patricia began to cry harder, reaching for his hand. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I thought you were gone. I've been talking about you like you weren't here. Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry." Harold squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. Patricia understood. Over the following weeks, Harold's care was completely transformed. A speech pathologist introduced him to an eye-tracking communication device that allowed him to spell out words by looking at letters on a screen. Physical therapists worked with him to maintain what mobility he had left. Most importantly, everyone began treating him as the aware, intelligent person he had always remained. Harold's first typed message to Rosa was simple: "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." His second message was to Patricia: "I love you. I never stopped being your dad." The notebook became the foundation for a medical case study. Dr. Peterson worked with neurologists to understand how Harold's condition had been misdiagnosed and how many other patients might be in similar situations. New protocols were developed for assessing consciousness in patients with complex neurological conditions. Rosa continued to work Harold's night shifts, but now their time together was filled with conversation through his communication device. Harold told her about his life, about the engineering career he had loved, about the 53 years he had been married to Margaret. He thanked her repeatedly for the small kindnesses that had kept him sane during his months of silent isolation. Harold also began communicating with other patients' families, helping them understand that their loved ones might be more aware than they appeared. His room became a place of hope for families who had been told their relatives were beyond reach. 6 months after Rosa discovered the notebook, Harold was featured in a medical journal article titled "Hidden Consciousness in Complex Neurological Cases." The article led to changes in assessment protocols at care facilities across the country. Harold became an advocate for patients' rights, using his communication device to speak at conferences and medical schools via video link. Patricia moved Harold to a specialized facility that could better accommodate his needs, but she made sure Rosa could continue visiting. The bond between the caregiver who had seen him and the patient who had waited to be found remained strong. Harold lived for 2 more years after his consciousness was discovered. They were difficult years physically, but they were also filled with connection, communication, and purpose. He was able to tell Patricia stories about her childhood that she had forgotten. He helped other families navigate the complexities of caring for loved ones with neurological conditions. He wrote, with painstaking effort through his communication device, a memoir about his experience of being conscious but hidden. Rosa often reflected on that October night when she had noticed the notebook. She thought about the other caregivers who had quit, and she wondered if they had been overwhelmed by the responsibility of knowing Harold was aware. She understood their fear, But she also knew that Harold's story had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless other patients and families. The most profound lesson Rosa learned was about the power of small kindnesses. Harold had survived months of conscious isolation, partly because she had treated him with dignity and respect, even when she believed he couldn't understand. Her gentle touch, her casual conversation, her attention to his comfort had been lifelines for a man drowning in silence. Harold's story became a reminder that consciousness can persist in ways medicine doesn't always recognize. It challenged assumptions about dementia, about end-of-life care, and about the importance of treating every patient as if they might be fully aware. Rosa carried that lesson with her to every patient she cared for afterward, knowing that behind seemingly vacant eyes might be a person waiting desperately to be seen. The notebook that started it all was eventually donated to a medical museum, a testament to one man's determination to prove that he was still there, still thinking, still hoping for connection. Harold's words continued to teach doctors and caregivers long after he was gone, ensuring that other hidden voices might be discovered and heard. Rosa never forgot the weight of that moment when she first read Harold's words, when she realized that someone she thought was lost had actually been waiting patiently for someone to notice he was still there. It reminded her that in the world of caregiving, the most important discoveries often happen not through advanced technology or complex procedures, but through the simple act of paying attention, of treating each person as if their inner life matters, even when they can't tell you it does.